Okay, let's dive into something that seems to be buzzing everywhere right now. How different generations think about work.
Yeah, especially this tension between, traditional jobs and the sort of allure of internet fame.
It really feels like a flashpoint. And to get into it, we've got some interesting source material today.
Right. So there's this viral video clip, a young woman with some pretty strong opinions.
Very strong. And then commentary on her clip from a host, Ricardo Dias.
And a second, much shorter clip that kind of shifts the mood a bit.
Exactly. So our goal here is really to, peel back the layers on these views, understand the arguments.
And maybe figure out what it all suggests about where work and maybe society's attitudes are heading.
Yeah. And the young woman in that main clip, she knew she was wading into controversy, said she might be stirring the hornet's nest.
Or risking cancel culture, as the commentator later mentioned. So yeah, definitely provocative stuff.
It really sparked a lot of conversation. So let's start with her, the young woman in that first video. She's reacting to something she's hearing a lot.
Right. She kicks off by talking about how common it is, especially among her peers online, to call formal employment, CLT, in Brazil a nightmare.
A nightmare.
Yeah.
And what are the reasons they give?
Well, the source mentions the typical complaints, things you might expect. Bad bosses, really long hours, packed buses and trains, that daily grind.
Okay, the usual suspects. But then she pivots, doesn't she?
She does. She says, okay, I understand. I know that it's not so good, acknowledging those points. But she argues that's not the real issue for, well, at least a segment of her generation. The deeper thing, she believes,
Is what?
is a fundamental unwillingness to, put in the work, to study, get qualified, actually work hard, find something meaningful in that traditional way.
Because she's saying it's less about the conditions and more about effort.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
She paints this picture of young people wanting to live off the internet, or maybe just live at home without doing anything.
The nem-nem generation, she calls them. Neither studying nor working.
Exactly. And she adds they're often supported by their parents, which enables it.
And that influencer angle seems key to her argument.
Huge. She points to influencers, streamers. Seeing them get famous and rich makes it look, well, deceptively easy.
Like anyone can do it. And she connects this to maybe not even having basic qualifications, like finishing high school.
Yeah, that some aspiring online stars might lack even that. And she apparently cited a stat, something like 90% of TikTok videos focused on wanting to work online.
Wow, 90%.
What's really sharp, though, and maybe where it gets controversial, is her point about labor rights. She argues this generation isn't interested in fighting for better conditions in the system. Her belief is they just don't want to engage with that kind of work at all.
So it flips the script a bit. It's not improve the system, it's avoid the system.
That seems to be her interpretation. It puts the focus squarely on willingness or the perceived lack of it.
She also mentioned parents, right? Parents give them everything.
Yes, suggesting that can make them too comfortable. Accommodated was the word used. And she even linked it to less physical activity among young people. Kind of a broader picture of avoiding effort.
Interesting. Okay, so now let's bring in the commentator, Ricardo Dias. How did he react to all this?
Well, he was pretty much immediately on her side, praised her for being direct.
Said he was becoming her fan, I think.
Yeah, and used some very strong language himself, called this segment of the generation vagabundos. A bunch of vagabundos.
Okay, so strong agreement there.
Definitely. He echoes her assessment about perceived laziness, wanting the easy way out, and he contrasts it with older generations.
How so?
He talks about his generation, seeing their parents in those stable CLT jobs. And the goal back then...
was to get one of those jobs, right? Or maybe a civil service position.
Exactly. Stability. That was the dream. Everyone wanted to, he says.
And he thinks the influencer thing changed that expectation.
Directly connects it. Watching people get famous online, seemingly easily. He argues it's created totally unrealistic ideas about work and reward.
He had that sarcastic line, didn't he? About not needing talent.
Yeah, just needing to expose yourself to the maximum, to the ridiculous. That's his take on it.
So what's his view on the CLT system itself? Does he defend it?
Not entirely. He acknowledges its flaws, calls it a mess, complains about high taxes, bureaucracy, unions, says it only serves to steal from you.
Pretty critical, then.
Very. But crucially, he emphasizes that despite all that, it is the first job for many. It's the starting point, the reality, especially for people without privileges.
So it's flawed but necessary in his view?
Kind of. He suggests it's maybe hard to achieve huge dreams just through CLT, But it's where you start. You make your nest egg there.
Well, maybe trying other things on the side, like the internet.
Exactly. He even uses himself as an example. Started with CLT, then built his YouTube channel.
And did he touch on the parents and physical activity points too?
He did. He mentioned parents maybe leaving kids neglected in a different sense. And yeah, the physical activity thing, he had that anecdote comparing kids playing outside back in the day.
Versus only seeing young people run now if they're like running from a mugging.
Yeah, a pretty stark comparison.
Now, the source mentioned a brief point of divergence.
Right, just a small moment. When the young woman mentioned fighting for labor rights, he sort of labeled that idea leftist.
Okay.
But the source notes he immediately pivoted back to his main theme, which was about the perceived unwillingness to work. We're just relaying how the source presented that interaction.
Got it. Impartial reporting. And his final thought was quite worrying, wasn't it?
Yeah, a pretty heavy conclusion. He worries that this kind of attitude, if widespread, could lead to electing bad leaders. Because, in his words, vagabundos recognize vagabundos and vote for vagabundos.
Wow. Okay. So summing up their main points, there's actually quite a bit of overlap, isn't there?
There is. Despite maybe slight differences in emphasis or tone, both the young woman and the commentator land on this critique of work ethic.
And this idea that influencer culture is fueling unrealistic dreams for some young people.
Exactly. That's the core convergence.
But you mentioned the young woman added some nuance.
She did. It's important. She explicitly said, nothing deserves to be generalized. She stressed that your experience with CLT might be totally different from your parents or grandparents.
Right. Each one has their own experiences. Don't paint everyone with the same brush.
Which is a good reminder.
Yeah.
And that actually leads nicely into the second clip, the one Ricardo Dias called A Glimmer of Hope.
Ah, yes, the hope clip. What happens in that one?
It's really simple. A dad showing his young daughter pictures on a phone. He shows her famous internet influencers.
And she doesn't know them?
Nope. Draws a blank. But then he shows her a picture of Van Gogh.
Oh.
She instantly recognizes him, knows about his painting Starry Night.
Ah, and that's what Ricardo saw as hopeful.
Exactly. He interprets that as a positive sign.
Why specifically?
Because, as the source quotes him, he feels that in this generation, any young person showing even the minimum interest in studying a little bit is already way ahead.
So valuing knowledge, art, history over fleeting online fame.
That's what he sees. He thinks kids like her, they represent a brilliant future.
Okay, so putting it all together, this deep dive really surfaces this tension, doesn't it?
Definitely. The critique of work ethic versus the draw of perceived easy success online.
The messy reality of formal employment versus maybe unrealistic aspirations.
The influence of different role models, parents working hard versus influencers living large, and then these contrasting ideas about where the future, or maybe hope, lies.
So for you listening, it really makes you think, doesn't it? Do you recognize these dynamics?
Yeah, is this something you see around you? How does this whole discussion connect to the real challenges young people face globally when choosing a path, defining success for themselves?
What stands out most to you from hearing these different takes?
And maybe it brings us to a final thought, something to mull over. Go on. In a world changing this fast, where work itself is evolving, what does being well prepared for the future actually mean now?
Is it still about the formal qualifications, the traditional path?
Or is it more about, adaptability?
Practical skills.
Resilience, something else?
And how do we as individuals and maybe as society find that balance between aiming high, having aspirations,
and understanding the reality of effort, the step-by-step progress that most real achievement demands? It's a tough balance to strike.